Here we are for another round of the 70s versus the 90s, and it's a look at reality TV when I put Albert Brooks's Real Life against Ron Howard's EDtv. And this one was a hard one to pick because both of these movies are really great in their own right, and they definitely do a good job at pointing out and satirizing the insanity of reality TV, the concept itself. So let's dive right on into the first one. We have Albert Brooks's Real Life, which was his first feature film and really his only good one. You know, the rest of all of his subsequent films that he made were kind of mid or far below mid. But this one is a masterpiece of, I don't know if you really call it experimental filmmaking. I guess it's more of a mockumentary, but Albert Brooks basically plays himself. You know, he also directed and co-wrote the film, but he plays himself as a filmmaker trying to make a real movie, so to speak, a fucking movie based off of real life, and hence the title and shit. So like he goes to this scientific institute to try to pick this family through all the fucking science and test to find a normal family, so to speak. And it comes down to two families, one from Wisconsin and one from Arizona. And it's like, and it's, you know, the movie itself is very funny. You know, this is like definitely peak Albert Brooks as far as the funny scale goes. And, you know, he's like, I'd like to say that we picked the fucking family by purely by scientific means, but I'm a comedian, not a liar. And I basically, it's, do you want to spend the winter in Wisconsin? You know, it's shit like that that is fucking hilarious. It's like, I could have been a doctor or a scientist had life treated me better and I had been graded more fairly and all that shit. You know, he's such a, you know, kind of a parody of himself in a way too. But they picked this family, and of course Charles Grodin's the father of the family, and he is like, he's a mess. And, you know, it immediately starts out as a shit show because their whole basis is to film this family for a whole year in their natural state, you know, sort of like kind of an anthropological study, a jumping off point of something that PBS had experimented with in the early 70s. And what's brilliant about it is how, and it's basically the whole thing of like reality TV, where it starts out, you know, with intentions of being realistic, capturing real life on the screen. And then there's that temptation to alter reality because reality is boring as fuck. Who the fuck wants to watch people just do real life? Like, people should get enough of that in their own lives. But no, it is, the more of a train wreck it is, the more people want to watch that shit, you know. And then of course, you know, not only does like the family have like a mental breakdown, of course, like the wife's going through some shit, you know, she's trying to, you know, flirt with Albert Brooks and stuff. And then, you know, but he's trying to like maintain it. You know, he starts out really well with intentions. He's like, I can get an Oscar and a Nobel Peace Prize for this shit. And then just like ends up like trying to manipulate the outcome because they're not doing anything. You know, like they get grief stricken because, you know, there's a death in the family and everything. And it's just a fucking, and, you know, they got these cameras that they put on their fucking head and, you know, all this shit. You just got people walking around like little pods on their fucking head, real like futuristic type shit, recording on digital and stuff, so they can capture every single moment. And then, but through this, you know, because like even they got Jennings Lang playing a fucking producer, you only hear his voice, but it's so fucking funny because this guy's like doesn't really understand the concept of what's going on. Why can't we just make a real movie, you know, type thing? And, you know, and then we see just Albert Brooks also have a mental breakdown when it just all goes to shit because, like, you know, one of the doctors on it like exposes it and starts talking shit about it, and then the media's in on it, and it just becomes a circus to the point where the family doesn't even want to do it because they can't even live a normal life because they got all these reporters in their shit and, you know, these cameras everywhere, and, you know, and they're not exactly in a good place. But you find out that fucking Albert Brooks is in even more of a fucked off place, so they decide to cancel the movie after 2 months where it was supposed to take place in a whole year. He's like, well, fuck it, I'll just film my own ending. And just decides, oh, what did they do with Gone with the Wind? They burned down Atlanta. Like, oh, we'll just burn down and he burns down their house. It is just sitting there watching that shit in a clown outfit, you know, just completely, like, his whole breakdown is just fucking great. You know, there's like the shining star of that. But the movie deals beautifully with how, like, you set out trying to do reality and then you end up trying to morph that reality into your own bullshit, and so to speak. And it's like, you're never gonna have it where it's like You know, just because just watching people do ordinary shit is boring as fuck. And just that ending of him just sitting there watching that shit burn is fucking hilarious. And then we move forward to Ron Howard's EDtv, starring Matthew McConaughey and Woody Harrelson and Jenna Elfman. And it's a fucking stacked cast because you got Sally Kirkland's in it, and Dennis Hopper, and Martin Landau, Rob Reiner, Ellen DeGeneres, like a bevy of like, you know, the big name stars of the time mixed with all. It's a perfectly cast movie. Everybody kind of plays their shit. We have a ambitious TV producer played by Ellen DeGeneres, she's got this hot new idea of like just following this guy, you know, 24/7 his whole fucking life. And so they do a whole like fucking talent search and shit. And you got Matthew McConaughey's character Ed, like he's not trying to be in it. His brother, played by Woody Harrelson in the film, is, you know, of course they are perfect as brothers, but he tries to go for it, but they end up, we want that other guy. And so he goes along with it, not really fully expecting what it all entails, you know. And mind you, like, whereas like real life was made at a time where like there wasn't reality TV at all. By the time they make EDtv, reality TV had become more of a thing due mostly to like the writer's strike of '93, where like the people are like, oh, you know, people will just watch reality shit, you know, and they will. As you see in EDtv, once it gets to rolling, the most brilliant thing about EDtv are those audience cutaways, because like you see this guy, you know, if you met this dude like on the street or anything that you wouldn't give a fuck, or you saw him in a bar, you'd probably write him off as a fucking shitless layabout, and you'd probably joke about him and all this shit. But whereas like you see him on TV doing all this silly shit, you're like, oh yeah, this guy's cool. Yeah, oh, you can't stop watching and shit. You know, like you see the husband and wife, you know, the wife's all obsessed with it, and then the fucking husband becomes obsessed with it, and, you know, just everybody, and, you know, of course, like everybody is all on his dick now. He's getting death threats, he's getting nude photos from women, he's like, you know, but it all overtakes, you know, the movie itself is kind of a fantasy though, because they have the lovely Jenna Elfman playing a UPS driver, and in my life, I have never seen a UPS driver that fucking hot. You know, so already this shit's a fantasy. And it's like, you know, it also, what that movie does beautifully is shows how, like, you can't get away with shit now when there's constantly cameras around, you know, because, like, he goes to visit his brother, and his brother's cheating on his girlfriend, who's played by Jenna Elfman. So then that allowed, like, he gets, excuse me, he gets McConaughey to go smooth things out with Elfman, but then they end up getting together and shit. And she all calls him out and stuff on the air, and it's just crazy. And then like his father, who, you know, sort of abandoned them when they were kids, played by Dennis Hopper, he comes back, you know, because now he's all famous and shit. And then they try to, like, when the shit doesn't work out with Jenna Elfman's character, because, you know, I mean, you can't really have a relationship on TV and stuff. You know, you basically just see this guy's life crumble because his family's a fucking train wreck, and all their shit just kind of comes out on the air, and he doesn't really intend to do it. And mind you, they don't really try to script it in any way. They do like kind of sway this guy. It's like, oh, maybe you want to do this, maybe you want to do that. Because Ellen DeGeneres is also perfect too. She adds a lot of heart to the film. Like, she's not as fucking like shitty as fucking Rob Reiner's executive character is, because that dude, once it's, you know, mind you, if it was a flop, it wouldn't have mattered, but it's a hit now, so he wants to keep it going and stuff. And it's like they try to throw Elizabeth Hurley in there, who's a model, to try to lure him in, but that fucks up. He ends up fucking falling on her cat and shit, and, you know, not, you know, that actual cat, you know, with a tail and shit. And, you know, it's just a shit show after shit show. And finally, you know, he gets kind of tired of the shit, you know, fucking his life up, so he wants to get out of it. But like Rob Reiner's character's not gonna let him out. You know, you're contractually obligated, all that shit, blah blah blah. So the way he finds a way out is he gets some dirt on homeboy, but he's gonna reveal it on live TV, you know, so the fucking can't get an actual boner, a penis pump, whatever the fuck shit. And so he decides, all right, well, fucking gets canceled. And then that right there, it's such a cop-out ending, you know, it doesn't really go for, whereas like you see something like Real Life where it just kind of shows the decline of like people that try to do this shit and you get wrapped up in their own bullshit. It's more or less like, you know, oh, this was a nice experiment, you know, and it was successful for a while. Nobody's gonna give a fuck, as the lady says on that fucking program at the end of the movie. But I don't know. I guess like it's like I said, this is a hard decision because both movies they are very funny and they do a perfect job of satirizing reality TV and all of the bullshit that goes along with it. And also, like I think EDtv deals more with like our obsession as an audience with reality TV and how hard it is to just not look away from a train wreck. You know, we see people like their lives are consumed by this. This shit's constantly on. It's on 24 hours a fucking day. This dude can't even sneak away to get a piece of ass without a camera in his face. So it deals with that perfectly, but that ending is so fucking lame. That's a problem with a lot of these comedies in, you know, not just the 90s, but comedies in general, where they rely too heavily on a happy ending where like, you know, I want to see a comedy that like, you know, it's funny all the way through, but then it just like, it ends on such a down note. That's impressive, you know, but everything works out in the end, you know, and I mean, of course, you know, you get drama here, drama there, but that ending of Real Life is way fucking better. So this round has to go to Real Life just for that ending alone. Because like I said, both movies do a perfect job of dealing with their subject matter and making it funny and everything's well cast in it, but one of them has to win, and it's usually the one with the better ending, and that's Real Life. So for anybody keeping score, that's 50-42. 70s are up by 8. You know, they keep coming back. You know, it's like the thing about the 70s is that they could always stick their endings. The 90s really couldn't. The thing about the 90s, they just had to wrap a little bow on it, whereas the 70s, they ripped the fucking bow off in the beginning and start just, you know, stomping on the package. And, you know, really leave you with something that's just, because even that fucking little thing at the end where it's like talking about everything that happens, like, and if there's any historians that watch this movie, you know, call this, no, you know, it's just, it's more aware of itself and it's not trying to be as cute as EDtv. So Real Life wins this round 50-42, 70s up by 8. You know, they keep maintaining that lead. You know, 90s will come back a little bit, but 70s, it's up and down, up and down. Real exciting. If I've said anything wrong, anything you disagree with, feel free to eviscerate me in the comments. It's all open forum. It's a rough draft to a doctoral thesis because I have a scientific obsession of which decade was better for filmmaking, the 70s or the 90s. I may have been right this whole time and it's the 70s, but we still got a long way to go before we find that shit out.